Hello, my dear literature enthusiasts. It's such a joy to have you here today. And if you've just stumbled onto this corner of the internet where words and moving pictures meet, then welcome. This space is for those who find themselves lingering not just on what a film shows, but on how it speaks, how it whispers into the corners of our minds, stirring questions that keep us awake long after the credits roll. Before we dive in, let me gently remind you, if you enjoy these kinds of deep, thoughtful wanderings into cinema, feel free to like and subscribe. Not out of obligation, but so that we can keep building this little circle together, a place where movies are not merely consumed, but truly contemplated. And one important note before we continue. What follows is not a conventional review. It's not about whether the acting was good or bad in the way critics often phrase it. This is instead a theoretical, critical reflection meant for those who come from a background of literature, philosophy, and intellectual curiosity. Think of this as sitting in an old library with me, a film flickering silently in the background, while we lean forward in our chairs and explore what lies beneath the surface. The film I want to share with you today is Killing Me Softly, 2002. I mention its name here at the beginning because I know some of you may want to pull it up later. But after this moment, let's allow the story, the emotions, and the reflections to flow freely without having to anchor ourselves again and again to the title. I want the conversation to be about essence, not labels. When I first encountered this film, I wasn't sure what I was walking into. It came recommended in passing, almost like a secret share between acquaintances. You should see it. It's not what you think. I pressed play expecting a fairly standard psychological thriller, maybe something in the tradition of late 90s melodramas. What unfolded, however, was a strange, intoxicating mixture of beauty and unease, the kind of cinematic experience that sneaks into your subconscious. At its core, the story is about a woman who is pulled, almost magnetically, into a whirlwind romance with a man she barely knows. It begins innocently enough, with chance encounters and the spark of attraction, but very quickly the film plunges us into obsession, secrecy, and danger. There's something unnerving about how fast the relationship escalates, how passion so quickly folds into fear. I remember watching those early scenes where every touch feels heightened, almost feverish, and realizing that the film wasn't really interested in love at all. It was interested in surrender, what it means to lose yourself to another person, willingly, even recklessly. The plot itself is deceptively simple. A young woman falls for a mysterious stranger. Their affair grows with blinding speed, until it takes on the qualities of addiction rather than affection. Shadows from his past begin to surface, unsettling hints of violence, of secrets buried beneath charm and elegance. The audience is constantly teetering between desire and suspicion. Is he a dangerous man, or is she projecting danger onto him because of her own insecurities? That tension is what propels the narrative forward, pulling us into a spiral where certainty becomes impossible. What fascinated me most, though, wasn't the mystery of what would happen next, but the way the film captures the psychology of intimacy when it tips over into obsession. I think many of us, in our own lives, have experienced moments, perhaps not as extreme, where attraction overrides reason. You know that feeling, don't you? When you meet someone and the world seems to rearrange itself around their presence. Suddenly their words echo louder. Their gaze seems to follow you even when they're gone, and your choices, once your own, begin to bend toward them. Watching this film, I was reminded of those moments in my youth when I mistook intensity for truth. When I believed that the strength of a feeling guaranteed its purity. The film dares to show how dangerous that assumption can be. It doesn't judge its characters outright. It lets them stumble, surrender, and rationalize. But in doing so, it forces us to examine our own vulnerabilities. How far would I go? I wondered if I believed I had found the one. What would I overlook? What red flags would I explain away because the alternative, being alone, felt unbearable? These questions haunted me long after I finished the movie. There's also the way the story plays with secrecy. Everyone harbors hidden selves, but here the secrets aren't just private, They are menacing. A locked room, a whispered name, a memory half revealed. The film understands the literary power of the forbidden, the way a closed door in fiction always beckons the reader to imagine what's inside. As an audience, we're invited into that tension. Every unanswered question feels like a cliff edge, and yet when answers arrive, they don't bring clarity, only deeper confusion. That a move straight out of Gothic literature, revelation as a kind of punishment, where knowing the truth makes you more uncertain than before. I have to admit, part of why this film resonates with me is because it mirrors something I've wrestled with personally, the allure of mystery. I've always been drawn to people who hold a certain enigma, as though their silence conceals profound wisdom or unimaginable stories. In friendships, in love, in life itself, I've often mistaken secrecy for depth. This film, with its lush visuals and dangerous romance, forced me to confront how perilous that belief can be. Sometimes mystery is not depth at all. It is simply concealment. And sometimes, what is concealed should never be unearthed. One of the film's most striking qualities is its atmosphere. It's set against a backdrop that feels at once intimate and alien. Rooms are dimly lit, colors are saturated, and the camera lingers uncomfortably long on faces and gestures. Watching it feels like walking through a dream where every object is symbolic, where the air itself seems thick with meaning. That dreamlike texture reminded me of reading certain novels where the plot seems secondary to mood, the kind of stories where you turn the page not to see what happens, but to dwell a little longer in the author's world. And oh, the twists. Without spoiling too much for those who haven't yet seen it, I'll simply say this. The film is not content with a single revelation. Just when you believe you've pieced the puzzle together, another layer slips free. Motives are upended, sympathies shift, and you realize that what you thought was solid ground is quicksand. It's not the kind of twist that makes you gasp in shock. It's the quieter, more disturbing kind, the one that makes you rethink every scene you've already watched. Those are the twists I love most because they don't just change the ending, they change the beginning too. I think about this often, especially when I read literature with unreliable narrators. A character confesses something late in the story, and suddenly all the earlier chapters flicker with new light. That's how this film works. It rewires your perception retroactively. It forces you to ask, was I complicit in misreading all along? Did my desire for romance blind me as much as it blinded the protagonist? It's uncomfortable, yes, but also exhilarating because it reveals how vulnerable we all are to the stories we tell ourselves. This is why I hesitate to call the film a thriller in the ordinary sense. Yes, there are moments of suspense. Yes, there is danger, but the true thrill lies in its exploration of psychological entanglement. It's about the peril of surrender, the intoxication of desire, and the terrifying possibility that love, when mixed with obsession, can destroy more than it creates. As I reflect on it now, I realize that what the film gave me was not closure, but confrontation. It confronted my romantic ideals, my fascination with secrecy, my tendency to believe that passion justifies itself. And that, I think, is the mark of any art worth engaging with. Not whether it entertained me, but whether it made me reconsider something about myself. So, my friends, as we prepare to wander deeper into the analysis in the coming sections of this video, I invite you to bring your own memories to the table. Think about the moments in your life when desire and doubt collided, when mystery tempted you more than clarity, when love, or what you thought was love, drew you into dangerous territory. Hold those memories gently, without judgment, and let them resonate with the film's story. Because in the end, what cinema offers us is not escape, but reflection, a mirror held up to our most secret selves. When I think back on how the film begins, I can still feel the strangeness of its opening rhythm. It doesn't rush. Instead, it lingers, as though letting you breathe with the characters before thrusting you into their world. The story opens in London, that gray, restless city where people brush past each other on sidewalks, their gazes rarely meeting, everyone lost in the private universe of their own obligations. And then, almost as though fate itself stirs the air, two people collide. Not in a literal stumble, but in one of those fleeting glances that catch you off guard, the kind that stays with you long after you've turned the corner. She is Alice, an American woman who has built a tidy life for herself in London, working in the art world, the sort of profession that already suggests she's tuned to beauty, to objects that carry meaning beyond themselves. He is Adam, a mountaineer with a shadowed charisma, a man whose very stillness suggests storms behind his eyes. Their first meeting isn't fireworks. It's something quieter, almost eerie. A magnetism that doesn't scream but whispers, and in that whisper, you feel an inevitability. I remember watching those early moments and being reminded of the times in my own life when attraction didn't announce itself with thunder, but with silence. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice in the room that captures you. It's the one that barely speaks at all, but somehow bends the air around them. That's what this meeting felt like. The narrative wastes little time before plunging Alice into Adam's orbit. She has a boyfriend, reliable, safe, perhaps even loving in his steady way, but the memory of Adam lingers. You can almost sense the tug-of-war beginning inside her, the part of her that craves stability wrestling against the part that longs for something raw and untamed. It's such a human dilemma, isn't it? The longing for security versus the hunger for fire. I can't help but think about moments in my own past when I stood at similar crossroads, torn between the comfort of what I knew and the allure of what I couldn't yet understand. Very quickly, their paths cross again. But this time, it's not a passive glance. It's a choice. She follows him, and in that decision, everything shifts. There's a remarkable scene where Alice simply steps into his space, and it's as though the city fades around them. Conversation becomes unnecessary. Bodies speak what words cannot. The intensity is overwhelming, and in a matter of days, she abandons the life she had before. Her boyfriend, her routines, her safety, all left behind, discarded like a skin she no longer needs. This is where the film begins to feel less like a love story and more like a fever. The passion between Alice and Adam is unrelenting, almost suffocating in its urgency. Every scene between them vibrates with physicality, touch, breath, skin, and yet, underneath the sensuality, there's something unsettling. Adam's control over her is absolute. He dictates the pace, the terms, the silences. Alice is swept along, willing, even eager, but you can feel the imbalance growing. I find myself thinking, while watching, about how easy it is to confuse surrender with intimacy. How often do we hear people say, "I lost myself in him," or "she consumes me"? We romanticize this loss of self, but there's something terrifying in it too. Watching Alice, I couldn't help but remember times when I handed over too much of myself in relationships, mistaking obsession for devotion. The film seemed to whisper, "Be careful, because once you give yourself away, reclaiming that self may not be possible." The story escalates when Alice and Adam marry, almost impulsively, as though driven not by thought, but by compulsion. Marriage, that ultimate symbol of permanence, arrives here not as culmination, but as acceleration. One moment they're in bed, tangled in one another, and the next they're husband and wife. It feels dizzying, like watching someone leap off a cliff without checking if there's water below. It's around this point that the shadows begin to lengthen. Alice notices fragments of Adam's past intruding on their present. A woman appears, his former lover, or perhaps more than that, who warns her cryptically, planting seeds of doubt. Adam himself becomes evasive, his temper quick, his secrets tightly locked away. The house they share begins to feel less like a home and more like a stage set, every corner filled with echoes of a past Alice can't touch. One of the most haunting motifs is a locked drawer, a space Adam forbids her to enter. It's such a simple device, one locked compartment, but symbolically it holds immense power. For Alice, it becomes the embodiment of everything she doesn't know about him. And the more she is told not to open it, the more consuming her curiosity becomes. Isn't that so true to human nature? The forbidden doesn't repel us. It beckons us louder than anything else. I thought of childhood moments when my parents said, "Don't go in there," and suddenly that room or drawer became the most fascinating place in the world. Alice's temptation is our own, magnified by fear. Her doubts begin to metastasize. She learns that Adam's sister died under mysterious circumstances, that his past relationships ended badly, that people whisper about him with unease. And yet, each time she tries to confront him, he disarms her, sometimes with anger, sometimes with tenderness, sometimes with silence. It's a disorienting cycle of suspicion and reassurance, leaving her perpetually unsteady. I couldn't help but think about cycles of manipulation I've seen in real life. How abusers, whether intentionally or not, often weave a web of contradiction. Warmth followed by coldness, intimacy followed by withdrawal. It creates a dependency because the victim clings to the memory of tenderness, believing it will return if only they wait, if only they endure. Watching Alice, I wanted to reach through the screen and tell her, clarity won't come from him. It will come from you trusting your instincts. But of course, she can't hear me. There's a particularly unsettling dinner scene where Alice meets Adam's family. On the surface, it's civil, wine, polite conversation, familial pleasantries. But beneath it, there's an undercurrent of dread. His family seems both protective of him and wary of him, as though they know something unspeakable but refuse to articulate it. It reminded me of Gothic novels where the grand old house conceals an unmentionable secret, where every relative smiles too tightly, their silence more damning than any confession. The first half of the narrative builds on this tension relentlessly. Passion curdles into paranoia. What began as erotic abandon turns into emotional imprisonment. Alice oscillates between moments of ecstasy and moments of terror, and we, as viewers, are trapped with her in that oscillation. One minute, you feel the intoxication of desire. The next, the claustrophobia of fear. And then comes the first major twist, one that shifts the ground beneath Alice's feet. She discovers a piece of Adam's past not from him, but from an outside source, a revelation that hints at violence, betrayal, even crime. Suddenly, the man she has tethered her life to is not who she believed. The locked drawer, the warnings from others, the strange silences, they all converge into a single question. Who is he, really? That question is where the story leaves us dangling at this point, not with resolution, but with intensifying unease. It's like reaching the midpoint of a novel and realizing the narrative you thought you were reading is not the narrative at all. The love story has dissolved into a mystery. The mystery is threatening to dissolve into horror. As I sat watching this unfold, I realized that what gripped me most wasn't whether Adam was guilty or innocent, dangerous or misunderstood. It was the recognition of how fragile intimacy can be when it's built on blindness. Alice's story is extreme, yes, but at its heart, it's a cautionary tale we all know too well. The perils of rushing headlong into passion without pausing to ask, do I really know this person? Do I even know myself in their presence? There's a moment, right after Alice begins to piece together the fragments of Adam's past, when the air in the story changes. Up to this point, the unease has been simmering quietly beneath the surface, like a violin string stretched just to the edge of breaking. But now, that string begins to quiver with an urgency that you can't ignore. What had felt like passionate abandon becomes claustrophobic, and the intimacy that once seemed thrilling now tastes of danger. She can't escape the nagging thought, what do I really know about the man I married? That question, so deceptively simple, grows heavier with every passing scene. Adam grows more controlling, more evasive. He shuts down conversations, bristles at her questions, and his silences become as terrifying as his words. Alice, who once surrendered willingly to him, now finds herself trapped, pulled deeper by the very bond that once felt liberating. One of the turning points comes when Alice starts investigating on her own. There's a restlessness in her movements, a furtive quality, as though she's both terrified of what she'll find and compelled to find it anyway. She talks to people from his past, revisits old acquaintances, and the whispers she hears are darker than anything she had imagined. The death of his sister, once just a tragic footnote, looms now as a shadow of possible guilt. Old relationships are recast as patterns of control, manipulation, and destruction. This is the part of the story where the atmosphere reminds me most of Gothic literature. The familiar world of marriage and home morphs into a labyrinth of secrets. I couldn't help but recall novels where the heroine wanders through candlelit halls, opening doors she's been warned against, uncovering truths that will shatter her innocence. Alice isn't in a castle, of course. She's in a modern London flat, in restaurants, in offices, but the sense of dread is the same. The past presses in like unseen walls. There's also something deeply human here that resonated with me. That slow, painful dawning of recognition when someone you love reveals themselves to be someone else entirely. I've lived through a smaller version of that in my own life, and perhaps you have too. The moment when the face across from you, once trusted, once cherished, suddenly seems like a mask, and you wonder if you've ever really known the person at all. The film captures that heartbreak, not with melodrama, but with slow, suffocating inevitability. And then at last, Alice opens the forbidden space, the locked drawer. It's a moment heavy with symbolic weight. Inside, she finds photographs, objects, and fragments that confirm her worst fears. Proof not of love, but of obsession, not of intimacy, but of control. It's one of those moments where the audience feels the dread long before the character does. But when it happens, the impact is no less powerful. That drawer becomes a Pandora's box, and what spills out is not hope, but horror. What's remarkable, though, is how the film doesn't give her an easy exit. Even with this knowledge, even with her doubts turned into certainties, she remains entangled. That's something I found profoundly truthful. It's easy from the outside to say, why doesn't she just leave? But anyone who's lived through toxic relationships knows it's never that simple. Passion has its chains. Memory has its anchors. Fear, strangely, can bind as tightly as love. The tension escalates further when Alice becomes convinced that Adam may not only be manipulative, but violent. The film teases us with ambiguities. Was his sister's death an accident, or was he responsible? Were his past lovers victims of his temper, or of their own imaginations? The line between reality and paranoia blurs, and the brilliance of the storytelling lies in how it traps us inside Alice's perspective. We don't know for sure, just as she doesn't. We live inside her dread, her suspicion, her conflicted heart. And then comes the revelation that nearly unravels everything. A figure from Adam's past emerges with a confession, offering an explanation that seems, on the surface, to absolve him. The story twists again, throwing Alice and us into confusion. Could it be that she has misunderstood him? That her paranoia has led her astray? That the man she married is flawed? Yes, but not monstrous? This is one of my favorite turns because it plays on our deepest anxieties, the fear of being wrong. To suspect someone you love is to risk destroying not only the relationship, but also your own sense of judgment. Alice oscillates wildly here, torn between relief and renewed suspicion. She wants desperately to believe him, to sink back into the cocoon of passion, to silence the voice in her head that screams danger. And for a brief time, she does. They reconcile, they embrace, they attempt to restore the illusion of intimacy. But illusions are fragile things. The climax builds slowly through mounting confrontations and small discoveries until the truth can no longer be contained. Alice finally uncovers the reality of Adam's past, stripped of all ambiguity. The secrets, the violence, the manipulations, they coalesce into undeniable fact. And with that revelation, the story shifts from suspense into survival. What began as a tale of love and desire transforms fully into a struggle for freedom. The final act is harrowing. Alice is no longer the wide-eyed lover who surrendered herself at the start. She has become a woman fighting to reclaim her agency. The house that once felt like a sanctuary of passion is now a prison. The man who once seemed like destiny is now a threat she must escape. The cinematography reflects this transformation. Shadows grow deeper, spaces tighter, movements more frantic. You can feel the world closing in. And then, the confrontation. It's not loud in the way action films are loud. It's not a battle of fists and explosions. Instead, it's the devastating collision of truth and illusion. Alice faces Adam, not as a lover, but as an adversary, and the facade crumbles. Words are spoken, denials given, accusations hurled. And in the midst of it, Alice sees him clearly for the first time, not as the enigmatic figure she once adored, but as a man consumed by control, by secrets, by a darkness that cannot be tamed. The resolution is both inevitable and shocking. Without spoiling the precise mechanics for those who may not have seen it, I'll say this. The story doesn't end in romance, nor in neat justice. It ends in a kind of haunting clarity. The love that once seemed intoxicating is revealed as a cage. The mystery that once enthralled her is revealed as corruption. And Alice, battered but alive, emerges not triumphant, exactly, but awakened. For me, the power of the ending lies not in what happens to Adam, but in what happens to Alice. She begins as someone who surrenders everything for passion, who abandons herself in the name of desire. She ends as someone who, scarred and shaken, understands the cost of that surrender. It's a painful lesson, but also a liberating one. She will never again confuse obsession for love, secrecy for depth, intensity for truth. I remember finishing the film and just sitting in silence, thinking about all the ways it mirrored the cycles of human relationships. How often we rush into intimacy, convinced that the sheer force of feeling must mean destiny. How often we excuse red flags because the alternative, being alone, feels unbearable. And how, sometimes, it takes walking through the fire of betrayal or danger to finally understand ourselves. The ending doesn't hand us comfort. It doesn't say, here is the villain, punished. Here is the heroine, safe. Instead, it leaves us unsettled, reflective, and perhaps a little haunted. And in that haunting, I think, lies its true artistry. Because isn't that what great stories do? They don't simply tie bows around their characters and send us home smiling. They press into us questions that linger. They force us to see the echoes of our own lives in their fictions. Watching Alice walk away, I saw echoes of times when I too walked away from something intoxicating but destructive. Times when I had to rebuild myself from fragments, wiser but also wearier. And perhaps that is the ultimate twist, not in the narrative itself, but in the way it reaches beyond the screen into our own hearts. The realization that this story, with its mystery and obsession and terror, is not just about two characters on a screen. It is about us, about the choices we make when we're blinded by desire, the silences we accept when we should demand answers, the dangers we ignore because passion feels too precious to lose. The final images linger with me still. The city of London, cold and indifferent, carrying on as though nothing has happened. People walking to work, cabs splashing through puddles, conversations drifting through cafes. Life continues, and in the midst of it, Alice, changed forever, carrying secrets she will never fully share, carrying wounds that will take time to heal. That quiet ending, without fanfare, struck me as more honest than any explosion or kiss could have. Because that's how life is. After the storms, the world keeps turning, and we carry on, marked but still moving forward. What stays with me most after watching the film isn't just the twist of its plot, but the people who inhabit its world. They are not many, and yet the few we meet are drawn with such intensity that they seem to echo long after the story ends. They are not heroes or villains in the neat sense of those words. They're human beings, entangled in longing, secrecy, and fear. At the center, of course, is Alice. She is the lens through which we experience everything, and in many ways, she is also a mirror. What struck me first about her wasn't her vulnerability, though that is evident, but her hunger. She is not a passive character swept away by events. She is actively searching for something beyond the boundaries of her tidy, safe life. When she abandons her boyfriend in those early scenes, it isn't simply because Adam appears and seduces her. It is because she has been waiting, perhaps without even knowing it, for someone to disrupt her world. I found that both unsettling and deeply relatable. Haven't we all, at some point, longed for a disruption? A moment that tears the fabric of routine and promises something raw, something alive? Alice embodies that yearning. She doesn't want to simply live. She wants to feel, even if feeling comes at a cost. Her arc is painful to watch because it is, in essence, the story of a woman learning what kind of hunger is worth feeding and what kind devours her. She surrenders so completely to Adam not because she is weak, but because she is willing. That's a crucial distinction. Weakness implies she had no choice. Willingness means she chose, and that makes her downfall all the more heartbreaking. She is not a victim of circumstance. She is a victim of her own desire, her own willingness to hand herself over. I think about the moments when Alice hesitates, when suspicion creeps into her eyes, when she begins to see the cracks in Adam's facade. There's strength in those moments. But then, inevitably, she folds back into him, seduced by his intensity, disarmed by his tenderness, paralyzed by her own need for certainty. Watching her is like watching someone drowning, not because the water is too deep, but because they don't yet realize they can swim. And then there is Adam. If Alice is a mirror, Adam is a mask. Everything about him is constructed to conceal, to withhold. He is a man who speaks in silences, who reveals as little as possible, who uses mystery as both shield and weapon. From the moment he appears, we sense danger, not the overt danger of violence, but the subtler, more insidious danger of someone who understands the power of being unknowable. There is something intoxicating about people like Adam. I admit, I've been drawn to them in my own life. The ones who sit quietly at the edge of a room, the ones whose stories never come easily, the ones who seem carved out of secrets. We project onto them whatever we want to believe, because mystery is a blank canvas. Adam is that canvas for Alice. She paints him as a lover, as a savior, as destiny, and he allows it, perhaps even encourages it, but never quite confirms it. What makes him so chilling is not simply his secrecy, but his control. He dictates the terms of their intimacy, when they speak, how they touch, what remains hidden. Even his moments of tenderness are calculated, delivered like doses of medicine to keep her bound to him. I kept wondering, does he love her in any sense of the word? Or is she simply another conquest, another subject in his ongoing performance of dominance? The ambiguity is deliberate. Adam is never fully revealed, never neatly explained. We learn fragments of his past, pieces of his truth, but never enough to feel complete certainty. That ambiguity mirrors life, doesn't it? We never truly know anyone, not fully. Even those closest to us are mysteries, carrying rooms in their hearts we will never enter. Adam embodies that unknowability to an extreme. And yet, there are moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when you wonder if he is haunted, too. The story of his sister, the shadow of grief that flickers in his eyes. These are hints that he is not simply a predator, but a man fractured by pain. Whether that pain excuses his actions is another matter entirely, but it complicates him. He is not a caricature of evil. He is a man whose darkness may have roots in sorrow as much as in cruelty. What fascinated me most in watching him was the way he draws not only Alice, but us into his orbit. We, too, are seduced by his stillness, unsettled by his gaze, curious about what lies behind the mask. In that sense, we are complicit. We participate in Alice's surrender because we also want to know him, to unlock the drawer, to understand the silence. That complicity is what makes him such a powerful character. He forces us to examine our own attraction to mystery, our own hunger for danger disguised as depth. Then there are the secondary figures, orbiting around this central relationship like moons reflecting fragments of light. Take Alice's boyfriend, the man she leaves behind. He is drawn as safe, stable, perhaps even dull. He represents the life she abandons in pursuit of something greater. And yet, in retrospect, he also represents the life she might have needed, the life built on transparency, steadiness, security. His presence in the story is brief, but it lingers as a contrast. He is the path not taken, the ghost of a choice she discarded. I often wonder how many of us have an unchosen life like that, a person or path we abandoned not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't enough. Watching Alice discard him, I felt the pang of recognition for times I've done the same. Left behind something safe in pursuit of something thrilling, only to later realize the thrill came with shadows I wasn't prepared to face. There's also Adam's former lover, who appears like a specter from the past to warn Alice. Her role may seem small, but symbolically it is immense. She is the voice of experience, the living embodiment of where Alice might end up. And yet, Alice doesn't listen. Isn't that always the way? We rarely heed warnings when we are in the grip of passion. We nod, we smile, we dismiss, believing our story will be different. Watching Alice ignore her, I felt a knot of frustration, because I knew she was ignoring wisdom that could save her. But I also knew, painfully, that I might have done the same in her place. Adam's family, too, carry their own enigmatic weight. Meeting them feels like stepping into a hall of mirrors, everyone polite, everyone composed, yet everyone holding back something unsaid. They know his darkness, perhaps even fear it, but they shield him nonetheless. In that sense, they're not just family. They're co-conspirators in silence. Families often are. They protect their own, even when protection means perpetuating harm. That dinner table scene is chilling not because of what is said, but because of what is left unsaid. What I found most compelling about the family dynamic is how it echoes the broader theme of complicity. Just as Alice is complicit in ignoring red flags, just as we, the viewers, are complicit in our fascination with Adam, so too is his family complicit in shielding him. No one is innocent. Everyone plays a role in sustaining the cycle of secrecy and danger. And yet, if I had to choose the most important character after Alice and Adam, it would be secrecy itself. The film treats secrecy almost as if it were a character, lurking in every scene, shaping every choice. The locked drawer, the half-spoken warnings, the silences at dinner, all of these are embodiments of secrecy as an active force. It is secrecy that seduces Alice as much as Adam does. It is secrecy that fuels our own fascination as viewers. And it is secrecy, ultimately, that unravels everything. This, I think, is where the literary richness of the characters truly lies. They are not just individuals, they're archetypes. Alice is desire. Adam is concealment. The ex-lover is warning. The family is complicity. Together, they form a constellation of human truths, painful but illuminating. As I reflect on them, I realize the story doesn't ask us to simply judge these characters. It asks us to recognize ourselves in them. Have we not all been Alice, surrendering too much in pursuit of passion? Have we not all been Adam, hiding parts of ourselves we fear to reveal? Have we not all been the ex-lover, warning someone only to be ignored? Have we not all been the family, staying silent to protect someone we love, even when truth would be braver? That, I think, is why these characters haunt me. They are not distant fictions. They are echoes of us. Watching them is like watching fragments of our own choices, our own mistakes, our own secrets flicker on the screen. By the end of the film, Alice is transformed. She is no longer the woman who surrendered willingly, but the woman who survived the cost of that surrender. Adam, whether destroyed or simply unmasked, becomes less important than the truth he represented. The secondary figures fade into silence, their warnings and complicities complete. And what remains is not just a resolution, but a reflection, the recognition that characters like these are not confined to cinema. They walk among us. Sometimes they are us. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. When I think about this film, it isn't only the story on the screen that intrigues me. What fascinates me just as much are the shadows behind the camera, the oddities, the little accidents, the production stories that often remain hidden unless someone takes the time to dig them up. Every film is a kind of iceberg. We see the polished surface gliding across the water, but beneath it lies a mass of strange, unwieldy, and often unpredictable events that made the final product possible. This film, in particular, seems to carry an unusual number of such stories. The first fact that always stands out to me is how unlikely the film even was. The director, Chen Kaige, is celebrated in China for epic, deeply philosophical films like Farewell, My Concubine. To imagine him stepping into an erotic thriller set in London seems almost surreal. It's like asking a poet of sweeping dynasties to suddenly direct a modern, fevered melodrama. And yet he did. I sometimes wonder what drew him to it. Perhaps he was fascinated by the universal pull of desire, the ways it can transcend culture and geography. Or perhaps he wanted to challenge himself, to step into territory where he was not entirely comfortable. That discomfort, in a strange way, seeps into the film itself. It feels both meticulous and alien, polished yet uneasy, as though the film itself doesn't entirely know what it wants to be. Then there's the casting. Heather Graham, known at the time for roles that often leaned into charm and sensuality, took on Alice with a kind of raw openness. But what's particularly strange is how much criticism she faced for it. Reviewers tore into her performance, calling it stilted, wooden, unconvincing. And yet, I can't help but think, wasn't that the point? Alice isn't supposed to be slick or polished. She's supposed to be unsteady, conflicted, off balance. In a way, the very criticisms that people threw at her performance mirror the character's own instability. It makes me wonder whether what many called bad acting was actually a deeper kind of truth, one that audiences weren't ready to accept. Joseph Fiennes, as Adam, also brings his own strangeness. Coming off Shakespeare in Love, he was seen as a romantic lead, full of literary charm. And here he was, cast as a dark, brooding figure whose silence is more terrifying than his words. I've read that even during production, there was tension about whether he could pull it off. Some crew members reportedly doubted him, feeling he lacked the menace to embody such a character. But I think that very doubt feeds the performance. Adam isn't a caricature of menace. He is menace disguised as allure. He is danger cloaked in beauty. Joseph Fiennes, with his quiet presence, brought precisely that contradiction. The strangest part, though, is how poorly the film was received upon release. Critics savaged it. It holds one of the lowest scores on Rotten Tomatoes, a fact often repeated with a kind of gleeful cruelty. And yet, despite all the derision, the film refused to die. It lingered. It became a kind of cult object, whispered about in certain circles, shared in secret by those who found something haunting in it. I find that fascinating. Sometimes the very things dismissed by the mainstream are the things that carve the deepest mark in memory. It reminds me of certain books I love, novels that critics sneered at when they first appeared, only to later be recognized as strange masterpieces. Behind the scenes, the production was fraught with challenges. For one, the filming of the erotic sequences caused immense controversy. Reports suggest that Heather Graham herself was deeply uncomfortable at times, not because of the scenes themselves, but because of how they were received by the press. Tabloids descended on them, hungry for scandal, turning what should have been artistic exploration into fodder for gossip. I can only imagine how disorienting it must have been to bear yourself on screen in service of art, only to be ridiculed as though you were merely fodder for voyeurism. What many don't realize is that some of those intense scenes were shot in near silence on set, with minimal crew, to protect the actor's privacy. The result is that much of the rawness you see on screen was captured in an atmosphere that felt more like a theater rehearsal than a film set. That intimacy, I think, seeps through. It doesn't feel like a Hollywood sex scene. It feels like something more awkward, more uncomfortable, more real. And that realism is precisely why it unsettles so many. There's also the curious case of the soundtrack. Craig Armstrong, who composed sweeping scores for films like Moulin Rouge, lent his music here. The lush, aching strings almost don't belong in such a claustrophobic film, and yet they elevate it into something operatic. The oddest detail, though, is that some of Armstrong's themes were recycled. Pieces he had originally written for other projects found their way into this film, reworked and reshaped. It's as if the music itself carried echoes of other stories, haunting this one with memories of worlds beyond its own. And then there's the fact of the book. The film is based on a novel by Nicci French, the pseudonym of a husband and wife writing team known for psychological thrillers. What's unusual is how much the film diverges from the novel's tone. The book is taut, sharp, precise, focused more on psychological suspense than on sensual intensity. The film, by contrast, dives headlong into erotic obsession, often leaving behind the subtler textures of the source material. That divergence frustrated fans of the book, but I find it strangely fascinating. It's as though the film isn't really an adaptation at all, but a reimagining, an appropriation of the skeleton of the story to build a very different body. One of the strangest facts I uncovered is that Chen himself later admitted regret over making the film. He called it a mistake, saying he felt disconnected from the project, that it wasn't truly his voice. And yet, I find that confession poignant. Because isn't that often the case with art? Sometimes the works artists regret most are the ones that resonate most with audiences in unexpected ways. His discomfort, his dislocation, becomes part of the film's DNA. It explains why the film feels both intimate and alien, both committed and estranged. There were also technical oddities during production. Some of the mountain climbing sequences, for example, were filmed not on location, but in studios with elaborate sets, fake snow, and green screens. Knowing that makes them even stranger to watch. The mountain, that symbol of Adam's untamed nature, is in fact as artificial as the romance he offers. The artifice of the set mirrors the artifice of his mask. That kind of unintentional symbolism delights me, when the practicalities of filmmaking accidentally align with the themes of the story. And speaking of accidents, there were reports of tensions between cast members on set. Heather Graham, by some accounts, struggled to connect with Chen Kaige's directing style. Coming from different cultural traditions, they sometimes seemed to misunderstand each other. Kaige, used to working in China with crews who revered him, found the British-American production environment jarring. That cultural clash simmered quietly beneath the surface of filming, and perhaps that's why the final product feels so disjointed, passionate in one moment, awkward in the next. But again, I find that disjointedness strangely fitting. A story about disconnection was itself born of disconnection. Another piece of trivia I love is that the film nearly had a different title during production. Studios toyed with more conventional thriller names, something sharper, more direct. But ultimately, they settled on the title we know, a title borrowed from a song, itself a cultural artifact of longing and vulnerability. That title adds an ironic tenderness to the film, a softness that clashes with its darkness. It's strange how much a title can shape our expectations, and how often films almost end up with something entirely different. Perhaps the strangest fact of all is the afterlife of the film. Despite its critical failure, it found unusual pockets of adoration. In certain countries, it became a surprise hit on DVD, quietly circulating among viewers who found its rawness compelling. In others, it was mocked relentlessly, becoming shorthand for bad cinema. That split reception fascinates me. How can the same work be dismissed as trash in one place and cherished as cult art in another? It reminds me that art is never singular. It doesn't exist in itself. It exists in the eyes of those who encounter it. Even stranger, Heather Graham later spoke about how the film haunted her career. Casting directors whispered about it, tabloids dragged her through it, and yet fans still approached her about it years later. The film became both an albatross and a cult badge, both a wound and a kind of secret fame. That duality, of something being both curse and gift, is perhaps the strangest fact of all. And then, if you dig even deeper, you find odd production choices that most viewers would never notice. The color palette, for instance, shifts gradually as the film progresses. Early scenes are brighter, washed in natural light. Later scenes descend into deeper shadows, as though the film itself is being swallowed by the darkness of Adam's secrets. It's subtle, almost subliminal, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. That progression mirrors Alice's journey, from the brightness of new passion into the shadows of dread. Another detail, the costumes. Alice's wardrobe becomes progressively more subdued as the story unfolds. Early on, she wears lighter tones, casual clothes that suggest openness. As the film darkens, her clothes grow darker, heavier, more constricting. Whether intentional or accidental, it's a visual metaphor for the way Adam's presence closes around her, narrowing her freedom until even her clothing feels like a cage. And then there's the curious editing. Some scenes linger longer than you expect, with uncomfortable pauses and silences. At first glance, you might think it's simply bad pacing. But if you sit with it, those silences begin to feel intentional, even if by accident. They create unease, forcing us to sit in the discomfort rather than rushing us along. It's a strange choice, but one that gives the film its eerie rhythm. The strangest trivia, though, may be this. Despite everything, the critical failure, the awkward production, the cultural clashes, the film still lingers in conversation. 20 years later, people still talk about it. They still write essays, still share it in hushed recommendations, still argue about whether it is a misunderstood work of art or simply a misfire. That persistence is its own kind of strangeness. So many films vanish within months of release, forgotten almost immediately. But this one, strange as it is, endures. As I reflect on all these behind-the-scenes facts, I realize they form their own narrative parallel to the one on screen. A narrative of missteps and misunderstandings, of accidents and regrets, of art that emerged from tension rather than harmony. And perhaps that is why the film feels the way it does, why it unsettles, why it doesn't sit neatly in any genre box. It was born of strangeness, and so it carries strangeness in its bones. I find that comforting, in a way, because life itself is strange. Our relationships, our choices, our art, they rarely unfold cleanly. They stumble, they fracture, they contradict themselves. This film, both on screen and behind the scenes, embodies that truth. And that, to me, makes it not a failure, but a kind of accidental masterpiece. There are films you watch once and forget. They move through you like water, leaving little trace. And then there are films that stick, not always because they are flawless, but because they resist neat categories. This one belongs firmly in the second group. To understand it critically, you can't just chart the plot or list the characters. You have to wrestle with the events that shape it, moments that feel ordinary on the surface, but reveal their strangeness when held up to light. These events aren't just plot mechanics. They're pulses of meaning that ripple through the film's texture. The very first meeting between Alice and Adam is one such event. Critically, it matters because it is understated. There are no fireworks, no swelling music, no love at first sight cliches. It is a glance, a pause, a silence that stretches just long enough to feel uncanny. Why does that matter? Because it sets the tone for everything that follows. The entire film operates on tension built from absence. What is not said, what is not revealed, what is not explained. Their first encounter is a lesson in withholding. In literature, we might compare it to the way Gothic novels begin not with violence, but with a faint chill, a door left ajar, a whisper in a corridor. That small unease blossoms into obsession. What I find fascinating about this scene from a critical perspective is how it manipulates the audience into complicity. We are asked to believe in their attraction without the film providing us reasons. We don't know why Alice feels drawn to him. We don't know what Adam sees in her. And yet, we accept it. We lean into their chemistry because the film demands it. That is an important device. It forces us into the same blindness that will later entrap Alice. Critically, it's not sloppy writing. It's a mirror of seduction itself. You rarely know why you're drawn to someone. You just are. The decision Alice makes soon after to abandon her stable boyfriend and plunge into Adam's arms is another event worth lingering on. From a critical lens, this is not just a plot twist. It's a commentary on desire versus safety. Her boyfriend represents rationality, the carefully ordered life. Adam represents chaos, intensity, danger. In literature, we often see heroines caught between two men, the safe choice and the dangerous one. But what's unusual here is how decisively Alice chooses danger. She doesn't waver for long. She leaps. This is both a feminist gesture. She owns her desire, unapologetically, and a tragic flaw. By placing this decision so early, the film tells us that the story is not about who will she choose, but about what is the cost of the choice she's already made. Then comes the marriage, so sudden it feels surreal. Critically, this event is crucial because it collapses time. In traditional storytelling, marriage comes at the end of a romance, as a reward or resolution. Here, it comes almost immediately, transforming what should be an ending into a beginning. That inversion unsettles us. It makes us ask, if marriage is not the resolution, then what is? If happily ever after comes at the 30-minute mark, what kind of story are we really in? That structural twist signals to the audience. This will not be a love story, but something darker. The discovery of secrecy, embodied in the locked drawer, is another pivotal event. On the surface, it's a simple object, almost cliched. But critically, it functions as a symbol of both Adam's inner life and Alice's own psychology. She cannot resist it. The drawer is the locus of her curiosity, her fear, her desire for control. In psychoanalytic terms, it becomes the forbidden room of Bluebeard's castle, the unconscious itself, filled with things one is not meant to see. Her fixation on the drawer reflects her fixation on Adam. She wants to know him completely, to strip away the mask, even though deep down she fears what she will find. The drawer is not just a prop. It is the story's thesis statement. Desire is always tangled with danger. Critically, the event of Alice meeting Adam's family is equally revealing. On the surface, it's a dinner, polite and mundane. But from a literary standpoint, it is a performance of silence. The family knows something. We can sense it in their stiff smiles, their half-answered questions, their glances that last too long. This is complicity rendered in domestic form. In Gothic fiction, families often shield dark secrets, not out of malice, but out of fear or loyalty. Here, Adam's family functions as a Greek chorus of silence. They don't reveal truth. They embody the refusal to reveal. Their silence is more damning than any accusation could be. From there, the film builds toward revelations, twists about Adam's past, warnings from former lovers, the slow drip of dread. Each revelation is an event in itself, but what makes them significant critically is how they destabilize perception rather than clarify it. Normally, a revelation in a thriller provides answers. Here, each revelation raises more questions. That inversion is deliberate. It traps us in the same cycle as Alice, seeking truth, only to be thrown into deeper uncertainty. It's a commentary on obsession itself. You never reach satisfaction. The more you know, the less certain you feel. The confrontation between Alice and Adam, when secrets can no longer be contained, is the emotional climax. From a critical perspective, this is where the film crystallizes its themes. Adam is unmasked, not in a dramatic gesture, but in the collapse of illusion. Alice sees him for what he is, not a romantic hero, not a mysterious savior, but a man whose control and secrecy have consumed everything around him. Critically, this moment is devastating not because of what is revealed, but because of what dies. Alice's idealism, her hunger for absolute passion, her belief in mystery as depth. The film's ending, too, deserves critical attention. Unlike traditional thrillers, it doesn't give us neat justice. Adam is not destroyed in a way that satisfies moral order. Alice is not granted a happily ever after. Instead, The story closes with a haunting ambiguity. Life continues. Alice carries scars. The city of London goes on indifferent. This ending aligns with a modernist sensibility, rejecting closure, refusing catharsis, insisting that life is messy, unresolved, and ongoing. That refusal to console the audience explains why the film left critics unsettled. It doesn't satisfy genre expectations, it undermines them. Now, let's talk about the film's reception. Critics tore it apart, calling it melodramatic, unconvincing, even laughable. From one perspective, they weren't wrong. There are moments of awkward dialogue, scenes that linger too long, tonal shifts that feel clumsy. But from another perspective, those very flaws contribute to the film's resonance. The awkwardness mirrors Alice's discomfort. The clumsy tonal shifts mirror her unstable relationship. The melodrama mirrors the fevered unreality of obsession. What if the film's failures are actually accidental strengths? What if the very things critics mocked are what make the film so haunting to its small but devoted cult audience? This is where critical perspective becomes fascinating. A film can be both bad and brilliant, both clumsy and profound. Reception is not fixed. It is a dialogue between work and audience. At the time of release, critics expected a slick erotic thriller and were disappointed. But for viewers who approached it as a fever dream, a gothic allegory of obsession, it revealed a strange, unsettling power. Emotionally, the film resonates because it touches on universal fears. The fear of not truly knowing the person you love. The fear of surrendering too much of yourself. The fear that passion might not liberate you, but imprison you. These fears are timeless. That's why, despite its critical failure, the film endures in conversation. It unsettles us in ways we don't always want to admit. There's also the cultural perspective to consider. Directed by a Chinese filmmaker, set in London, performed by American and British actors, it is a hybrid artifact, never fully belonging to one tradition. That hybridity contributes to its disjointedness, but also to its uniqueness. It doesn't follow the rules of Hollywood thrillers or European art films. It exists in between. Critically, that in-betweenness is why it was rejected, but is also why it fascinates. It resists being pinned down, and that resistance is its power. When I think about the events of this film critically, I see them not just as steps in a story, but as reflections of broader truths. The chance encounter is about how we project desire onto strangers. The sudden marriage is about how we confuse intensity with destiny. The locked drawer is about the danger of forbidden knowledge. The family dinner is about complicity in silence. The confrontation is about the collapse of illusion. The ending is about survival without closure. Each event is both literal and metaphorical, both narrative and philosophical. That duality, being both a story and a reflection on stories, is what gives the film its resonance. It is not good in the conventional sense, but it is memorable in the literary sense. It leaves questions in the air, questions that cling long after the film is over. And isn't that what great literature does? Not give answers, but leave us haunted by questions we carry into our own lives. Every film is like a secret diary. What we see on the screen is polished, deliberate, edited down to the essentials. But behind that surface is a chaos of decisions, accidents, arguments, moments of brilliance, and moments of despair. That chaos is rarely visible to us as viewers, yet once you start digging, it reveals itself like fingerprints on glass. This film, for all its strangeness, is no exception. In fact, its behind-the-scenes story is almost as fascinating as the tale it tells on screen. One of the most intriguing aspects of the production is the director himself, Chen. Known worldwide for his sweeping, historical epics, particularly Farewell, My Concubine, he was revered as a filmmaker of depth and lyricism. And yet, here he was, in London, directing what many critics would later call an erotic thriller. The mismatch baffled people at the time. Why would a director who had captured the grandeur of Chinese history decide to make a story about obsessive passion and secrecy in a contemporary Western setting? Some suggested he was lured by the idea of breaking into Hollywood markets. Others said he was simply curious about different genres. But the truth seems stranger. Kaige himself admitted later that he felt disconnected from the project, that it wasn't really his film. That distance might explain the odd atmosphere that permeates the movie, a sense that it's both meticulously composed and strangely estranged from itself. Working with Kaige posed unique challenges for the cast and crew. Cultural differences, language barriers, and differing expectations often led to miscommunication. For instance, Heather Graham, who played Alice, came from an American acting tradition that emphasized openness, emotional honesty, and improvisation. Kaige, by contrast, valued precision, discipline, and visual composition. Their collaboration was fruitful in some ways. Graham gave herself fully to the role, but also fraught with tension. Crew members later recounted moments on set where Graham would seek reassurance or feedback, only to be met with Kaige's enigmatic silences. Was he disapproving? Was he simply contemplative? The uncertainty mirrored Alice's own confusion in the story, blurring the line between performance and reality. Joseph Fiennes, cast as Adam, faced a different challenge. Known then as the romantic hero of Shakespeare in Love, he was asked to embody a role that was the opposite of charming openness. Adam is withholding, brooding, almost predatory in his silences. Fiennes reportedly struggled with this transformation. Some crew whispered that he was too gentle for the part, too much of a poet to play menace. But others argued that this very softness worked in the film's favor. Adam isn't supposed to be an obvious villain. He's supposed to lure with allure, to hide darkness behind a handsome face. Fiennes' performance, though ridiculed by critics, became more interesting when you consider how he fought against his own instincts as an actor. The erotic scenes, perhaps the most talked-about element of the film, were filmed under unusual circumstances. Contrary to the glamorous myths of Hollywood, these moments were shot with minimal crew present, just the director, the cinematographer, and a few essential technicians. The set was closed to maintain intimacy and privacy, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a rehearsal space than a film set. Heather Graham later mentioned how strange it was to pour so much vulnerability into those moments, only to have them sensationalized by tabloids. Critics mocked the sex scenes as overblown, while gossip magazines turned them into scandal fodder. What often gets forgotten is how carefully those scenes were crafted. They were not improvised. They were choreographed like dance, every movement deliberate. That choreography gave them a rhythm that some found artificial but others found hypnotic. Lighting played a huge role in shaping the film's mood, and here lies another curious production detail. The cinematographer worked closely with Kaige to create a visual palette that shifted gradually over the course of the story. Early scenes were bathed in brighter, natural light, emphasizing openness and possibility. But as Alice fell deeper into obsession, shadows grew longer, rooms became dimmer, and colors became richer. By the time the story reached its climax, the entire film was saturated in darkness, as though the world itself was closing in. That progression wasn't accidental, it was carefully planned. And yet, many critics dismissed it as too heavy-handed, failing to see the subtlety in how light itself mirrored Alice's psychological descent. The mountain climbing sequences, brief though they are, also carried their own quirks. You'd think such scenes were filmed on real mountains, with actors clinging to rock faces high above valleys. In reality, much of it was filmed on studio sets with carefully constructed artificial cliffs. Fake snow, wind machines, and green screens created the illusion of danger. That artifice is oddly poetic. The mountain, Adam's supposed domain of freedom and strength, is itself a constructed illusion, just like the identity he presents to Alice. The accident of studio filmmaking became a metaphor for Adam's false mask, whether Kaige intended it or not. Music, too, carries behind-the-scenes stories. The score was composed by Craig Armstrong, whose lush operatic sound is heard in films like Moulin Rouge and Romeo and Juliet. But what's unusual is that Armstrong reused fragments of older themes, reshaping them for this film. In some ways, The score is haunted by echoes of other movies. That recycling created a strange resonance, as though Alice's story was being underscored by the ghosts of other romances, other tragedies. It's one of those production details that changes how you hear the film once you know it. The music isn't just accompaniment. It's a palimpsest of past stories layered over this one. Another odd detail, the novel. The film is based on a psychological thriller by Nicci French, the pseudonym for Nicky Gerard and Sean French. Their novel is taut, psychological, and suspenseful. But when Kaige and the screenwriters adapted it, they shifted emphasis toward erotic obsession. Many fans of the book were dismayed. In fact, Nicci French themselves were reportedly surprised by how different the tone became. That divergence created a rift. Readers expecting a faithful adaptation found something altogether stranger, while newcomers approached it as a standalone fever dream. That tension between book and film is part of what shaped its reception. The editing process is another production insight worth noting. Several scenes were cut or rearranged after test screenings. Audiences found some sequences confusing, while others complained about pacing. To address this, editors shifted the order of revelations, hoping to make the story clearer. Ironically, those changes may have made the film more disjointed. The strange rhythm, long pauses, sudden jumps, uneven pacing, reflects not only Kaige's style but also the compromises made in editing. What many saw as flaws were, in fact, scars from a process of reshaping, evidence of a film caught between artistic vision and commercial expectation. One anecdote I love involves the costumes. Heather Graham's wardrobe was designed to evolve with Alice's emotional state. Early on, she wears brighter colors, softer fabrics, casual silhouettes. As the story darkens, her clothes become darker, more structured, more constricting. The progression was intentional, a visual metaphor for her narrowing freedom. But here's the fun part. Some of those costumes weren't designed from scratch. They were borrowed from other productions, repurposed, and altered. That recycling means Alice's descent is, quite literally, clothed in the remnants of other stories. Another accidental metaphor. Her identity is stitched together from fragments of others, just as her relationship with Adam is built from illusions. Then there are the rumors. Some crew members whispered that tensions ran high on set, that Kaige's exacting style clashed with the more improvisational tendencies of Western actors. Others claimed that Fiennes kept to himself between takes, staying in character as the brooding, silent Adam. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories add to the aura of unease that surrounds the film. Watching it, you can almost feel that unease pressing through the screen, as though the production itself was haunted by the same tensions it sought to portray. Even the title has its own curious history. During production, alternative titles were floated, names that would have framed it more as a thriller, something sharp and marketable. But ultimately, the softer, more poetic title was chosen, borrowed from a famous song. That choice created dissonance. Audiences expected tenderness, vulnerability, perhaps even sentimentality, only to be confronted with obsession and dread. It's one of those fun facts that explains so much about the film's reputation. A different title might have changed everything. Perhaps the strangest production fact of all is how the film has endured despite its critical failure. Released to scathing reviews, it quickly sank from cinemas. And yet, in certain countries, it found surprising success on DVD. It became a whispered recommendation, a cult object, a film people watched not because critics told them to, but because they were curious about its strangeness. That afterlife, born not of marketing but of word of mouth, is part of what makes its production history so fascinating. And then, there's Chen Kaige's own later reflection. He admitted he regretted making the film, that it felt disconnected from his true voice. But here's the irony. Sometimes an artist's mistakes are the works that resonate most deeply with audiences. Kaige's discomfort shaped the film's alien texture, its sense of unease. Without that discomfort, it might have been just another forgettable thriller. Instead, it became something critics mocked, but audiences couldn't quite forget. When you weave all these production insights together, the cultural clashes, the careful lighting, the artificial mountains, the recycled costumes, the awkward editing, the reused music, you begin to see the film differently. It's not just a story about Alice and Adam. It's a story about filmmaking itself, about how art is stitched together from fragments, compromises, accidents, and intentions. That, to me, is the greatest fun fact of all, that the strangeness on screen is not just fiction, but the reflection of a strange, difficult, fascinating production. What lingers with me most, long after the film has ended, isn't only the faces or the plot twists, but the spaces. Rooms, streets, mountain cliffs, shadows across a window pane. These are the silent actors of the film, shaping how we feel without ever speaking. To explore the story critically, you can't ignore the settings, because they are not just backdrops. They are mirrors, prisons, traps, and sometimes accomplices. Take London, for instance. The city is not presented with tourist sparkle or romantic glamour. It is gray, restless, subdued, full of narrow streets and heavy skies. The architecture feels imposing, sometimes even suffocating. London here is a maze, a labyrinth in which Alice wanders and loses herself. From a cinematic perspective, this choice of tone matters deeply. A bright, romantic city would have framed her affair with Adam as an adventure. But this muted, heavy London turns the affair into something faded, like stumbling into a fog you can't escape. Cinematically, London is filmed in a way that strips it of its landmarks. We don't get Big Ben, Tower Bridge, or postcard shots. Instead, we see ordinary apartments, anonymous streets, hidden cafes. That anonymity amplifies the story's universality. This isn't just about London. It could be any city, any life. It makes the obsession between Alice and Adam feel less tied to place and more tied to psychology. Yet at the same time, the particular gloom of London, its damp weather, its old stone, its enclosed rooms, bleeds into the atmosphere of the film like damp through wallpaper. Alice's apartment is one of the most telling settings. At first, it is depicted as a place of independence, tidy, personal, well-lit. But once she moves in with Adam, her old home becomes ghost-like, a discarded shell. The film uses her apartment almost like a memory of safety, a visual echo of the life she left behind. Contrast that with Adam's home, which quickly becomes the central stage. His house is larger, darker, more luxurious, but also more alien. Its rooms are filled with secrets, its corners heavy with silence. The very walls seem to whisper, "You don't belong here." The transition from Alice's small, bright space to Adam's expansive, shadowed one is more than a change of address. It's a surrender of self. The interiors are filmed with deliberate claustrophobia. Rooms are often shot from angles that make them feel tighter than they are. The camera lingers on doorways, on corridors, on windows that let in light, but also keep the outside world distant. Watching these spaces, you begin to feel the cage closing in. This isn't accidental. It's cinematography doing narrative work. The walls trap Alice, just as Adam's presence does. And then there is the locked drawer. Such a small detail, such an ordinary piece of furniture, and yet it becomes the film's most charged setting. The drawer itself is rarely shown, but the camera builds tension around it. We see Alice's eyes flicker toward it. We see her hand hesitate near it. We feel the silence pressing down on the room where it sits. The drawer becomes less an object and more a place, a forbidden chamber, the heart of the house's mystery. In that sense, it echoes the Gothic tradition, the hidden attic in Jane Eyre, the forbidden room in Bluebeard. Here, the drawer condenses all of Adam's secrecy into a single cinematic element. Lighting is equally crucial. In the early stages of Alice and Adam's romance, the scenes are often drenched in warm, glowing light. Beds, skin, and fabrics are bathed in golden tones, suggesting intimacy and passion. But as the story progresses, those same spaces darken. Shadows grow thicker, the glow fades, and suddenly the same bed that once symbolized passion becomes suffocating. Cinematography turns comfort into menace simply by altering the light. One of the most fascinating cinematic choices is the use of lingering close-ups. The camera often holds on faces, too long, uncomfortably long, so that we're forced to see every flicker of uncertainty, every hesitation in the eyes. With Adam, these close-ups are especially unsettling. His silences become heavier under the camera's gaze. His face is handsome, yes, but the more you look, the more it becomes unreadable, almost mask-like. The camera insists on that ambiguity, refusing to let us look away. Movement, too, plays a role. When Alice is with her boyfriend early on, the camera is steady, grounded, almost static. But once Adam enters her life, the camera begins to move more restlessly. Tracking shots follow her as though she's being pursued. Handheld movements wobble slightly, as though her world has lost stability. These are subtle choices, but they create a subconscious unease. You may not notice the shift consciously, but you feel it. The mountain sequences stand apart as settings of raw contrast. On the cliffs, surrounded by snow and sky, Adam is presented as free, powerful, in control. The mountains are his domain, symbols of untamed masculinity and danger. And yet, as we know from production, many of these scenes were filmed on constructed sets. That artificiality seeps into the film in a strange way. The mountains look both real and unreal, both majestic and staged. It mirrors Adam himself, a man who projects natural power but conceals artifice and secrets. The mountains are not simply settings. They are metaphors for his duality. Cinematography amplifies this. Wide shots of the mountains emphasize Adam's grandeur, but when Alice is present, the camera pulls closer, making the space feel precarious rather than liberating. The same landscape is freedom for him and danger for her. That contrast is one of the film's most effective visual metaphors. Love that is liberating for one can be suffocating for the other. Color palettes shift subtly throughout the film. Early on, we see more light tones, creams, and golds. As the story deepens into secrecy, darker colors dominate. Blacks, deep reds, shadowed blues. Alice herself becomes a barometer for this shift. Her clothes darken, her spaces grow heavier, her world narrows into shades of gray. By the final act, the entire film feels drained of warmth, its palette reduced to shadow and menace. Critics dismissed this as heavy-handed, but I think it's deliberate symbolism. Passion begins as light, but ends in shadow. Desire begins as color, but ends in monochrome. Sound design, though less obvious than visuals, also shapes the setting. Notice how often silence is used. Rooms hum with stillness, broken only by footsteps or breaths. London, usually a noisy city, feels eerily quiet here. That quietness isolates Alice, amplifies her paranoia, makes every whisper of danger louder. The city doesn't roar around her, it suffocates her with silence. Camera framing also reflects psychological states. In moments when Alice feels trapped, she is framed tightly, boxed in by walls, furniture, or Adam himself. In moments when she surrenders, the camera pulls back slightly, giving the illusion of openness, only to close in again when doubt resurfaces. This push and pull between openness and confinement mirrors the push and pull of obsession. Cinematography here doesn't just capture action, it dramatizes psychology. Even ordinary props take on symbolic weight. A glass of wine, a door handle, a staircase. Filmed with care, they become charged. A staircase isn't just a staircase. It's the path into secrecy. A glass of wine isn't just a drink. It's a symbol of surrender. The film trains us to see objects as metaphors, much like in literature, where a single image can carry the weight of an entire theme. The family dinner scene, filmed in Adam's family home, deserves mention again for its setting. The dining room is elegant but cold, its walls adorned with muted art, its lighting dim and formal. The space itself communicates distance, silence, repression. When Alice sits at that table, She looks like an intruder in a ritual she doesn't understand. The cinematography frames her slightly apart, always just a little isolated, emphasizing that she will never truly belong in Adam's world. And then there's the final act, where settings collapse into claustrophobia. Rooms feel smaller, shadows thicker, hallways longer. The camera seems to press closer and closer until escape feels impossible. By the climax, the setting itself